Good evening, everybody. It is 7 p.m., according to the computer, on July 17th in the Aldermanic Chamber. This is a meeting of the Human Affairs Committee. Madam Clerk, you want to call the roll?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Alderwoman at Large Shoshana Kelly. Alderman at Large Melbourne Moran Jr.
Present.
Alderwoman at Large Gloria Timmons.
Here.
Alderman Patricia Klee is here, and Alderman Thomas Lopez.
Here.
Also in attendance is Alderman Derek Thibault, Mr. Sam Durfee, Planning Management, Mr. Julian Long, Urban Program Manager, and Michael Mira from New Hampshire Legal Assistance.
All right. Before we begin, we have our period for public comment. Would anyone like to step up to the microphone and make public comment? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, discussion?
Living conditions in Nashua and tenants' rights.
So I had invited Mr. Mera to come and have participate in discussion. I have also invited a number of city departments, including the building department, code enforcement, and environmental health. So we will continue working to try to get staff participation for that. Mr. Mera, would you want to have a seat up here? Thank you. Wherever's best comfortable. So just by way of introduction, I have been particularly concerned about tenant rights and living conditions since my first term as alderman and since shortly before that. My first official act was to be appointed to the Substandard Living Conditions Committee 8 years ago when the city was struggling with reports and documentaries that were covering the living conditions at Motel 6, the old Y at 23 Temple Street, and Country Barn. And so we were trying to figure out a way to introduce appropriate legislation to strengthen the ability of code enforcement and city departments to ensure that living conditions that were present in the city were of a reasonable quality and were attentive to tenant rights. So I chaired the Substandard Living Conditions Committee for several years until recently the decision was made to roll it into the Human Affairs Committee. So as committee members know, last year we made an effort to have those city departments come in and present on the different conditions that they were seeing, report any kind of ways that we could help them as aldermen. What can we do to make sure that our city departments are adequately staffed, have appropriate policies in place, and what can we do to best represent the needs of our citizens? Typically, I also struggle sometimes in the fall to try to bring awareness to the fact that the cold weather is coming. We have unsheltered people that wouldn't necessarily be eligible for traditional shelter settings. We have, over the past several years, had people sleeping even on Main Street. And so it's important to try to think of these things in the summer and in the warmer months, not wait until it's cold and we're over capacity and use short-term emergency solutions to long-term problems. So to that end, we've had a number of citywide initiatives that are underway. We have a collaborative effort between the nonprofit organizations at the Continuum of Care that do community outreach. We have coordinated with Department of Public Works, Public Health, and National Police to try to do outreach and engagement in the homeless encampments that are situated around the city. In recognition of the fact that there's been a number of encampments that have been here for a while and are well established. There have been people who have been living unsheltered for quite some time and are in need of extra outreach effort in order to resolve those different situations. Alderman Klee can attest to the fact that we've also done a lot of cleanup of those campsites, and we've, in the process of engaging those people who are unsheltered, trying to figure out what are the contributing factors? Why are people becoming homeless in the first place? Why are people having difficulty accessing emergency shelter or transitional housing opportunities? What can we do so that less people spend the night unsheltered? So that's the background for this kind of discussion. Mr. Mayor, if you would want to.
Sure.
First, when you speak, because you're not as familiar to our transcribers, don't forget to use your name and your address, and then introduce your program, the resources you have, and then any information you'd like to share.
Thank you for that introduction. My name is Attorney Michael Mara. I am a staff attorney with New Hampshire Legal Assistance. I thought I'd give you do I have to get my home address or my work address?
Either's fine.
1850 Elm Street, New Hampshire Legal Assistance. I work in the Manchester-based office. I thought I'd just give you a very, very brief background of my background, especially my connection to Nashua, and also tell you a little bit about New Hampshire Legal Assistance, what we do both here in Nashua and throughout the state. Before I joined New Hampshire Legal Assistance just this year, in April of 2023, I practiced here in Nashua for more than 30 years. I was a partner with Sullivan and Gregg for a number of years. I practiced, and then I started my own firm, Marin Kanakis, and we were based right down here at 159 Main Street for many years. I practiced with Mark Kanakis. I practiced with Scott Flagel and Peter Tamposi for many years. I also was the head cross-country coach here at Nashua South for a number of years, track coach, and was very involved with Nashua Pal and the cross-country program. I retired from full-time practice of law in September of 2021. But in the last 2 to 3 years before I retired, I got very involved with the New Hampshire Bar Association Modest Means Program and Pro Bono Program. And I probably devoted maybe 20% of my practice to tenants' rights and representing tenants in court. I really enjoyed that work. I found it very fulfilling, but it bothered me while I was doing that work as the number of tenants who were in court who didn't have counsel, had no idea what their legal rights were, and they were unrepresented. As you probably know, an eviction proceeding, a merits hearing can basically be a life or death matter. If someone's going to lose their affordable housing and they're then going to be thrust out onto the street, it is literally, it's a life or death matter. So I found that work rewarding. It stayed with me in the back of my head. I retired for 18 months and then got the bug to come back when I knew that there was a position open with the Housing Justice Project with New Hampshire Legal Assistance, and I applied and was accepted for that position. I feel very, very fortunate to be part of New Hampshire Legal Assistance. Let me just tell you a little bit about New Hampshire Legal Assistance and its Housing Justice Project. And I'll leave this one caveat that I'm brand new there, although I've practiced for a long, long time. So if I can't answer questions that you may have, I'm sure my colleagues who are very, very skilled will be able to answer that, and I'll be able to get you answers if you need them in short order. New Hampshire Legal Assistance is a statewide nonprofit law firm. We have 5 offices, one way up in Berlin. I was up there last week. We have an office in Claremont. We have an office in Manchester where I'm based. There's an office in Portsmouth, and then our main office is in Concord, which also houses our administrative office. I'm based in Manchester, and Manchester really, there is no Nashua office as of this time. And I would say in Manchester, we handle most of the Nashua, not all the Nashua cases, but I take particular interest in Nashua cases, obviously because I'm from this area and I've been here for so long. But other offices will also come down here and assist if I'm not able to help, or other colleagues in the Manchester office. New Hampshire Legal Assistance essential mission is representing clients with respect to issues that impact a person's daily ability to survive. We not only handle housing issues, we have lawyers who handle domestic violence issues, stalking petitions, assisting people on that front. Other lawyers and advocates assist people with public benefits, Social Security, SNAP program, unemployment benefits, local welfare applications, and things like that. We have immigration staff that handle people who might be, for example, detained out. Most of the detentions occur out in Stratford County. We provide legal representation to individuals who might be detained and at risk of deportation. We have a number of advocates, focused attorneys, paralegals, administrative assistants, focused on housing issues. Lauren Greenwald, who is based in Portsmouth, is our Housing Justice Project Director. And we are all dedicated to working on housing issues on behalf of tenants, not only tenants who are renting apartments, but also property owners who might be at risk of foreclosure. What we do is mostly eviction defense, though, and it's throughout the state. The last 2 weeks, I was in Berlin, Claremont, Plymouth last week, so we go all over the state. Although I like to come to Nashua, and it's basically my home. In addition to eviction defense, we provide fair housing counseling, deal with HUD issues, housing discrimination, and we have an attorney in Claremont, Stephanie Bray, who oversees our HAF program, which is federal funding, and I've got a handout I'll give to you in a minute about people who are at risk of foreclosures, can't pay their property taxes, can't pay utility bills in that program. When we were contacted by Alderman Lopez last week, he indicated that he was interested in tenant rights. So what I thought I would do is just give you 5 or 6 things that really have struck me in the time that I've been with New Hampshire Legal Assistance and have left an impression with me, not only in my 15 weeks with New Hampshire Legal Assistance, but several years of tenant defense work that I did before I joined and came over to this wonderful organization. These are things that I see that have just struck me as critically important. The first thing that I would say is that tenants need to know that they have a right to contest their eviction and their loss of housing. They have rights in New Hampshire under RSA 540. They have a right to due process. They cannot lose their housing rights without a court order. Many tenants don't understand that. And the landlords sometimes give the impression that they can simply throw someone out on the street. So sometimes tenants don't even contest the eviction. And I've seen that happen. Again, most of the time tenants are in court. They don't have counsel representing them. So they need to know that they have legal rights, and then when they're served with that landlord-tenant writ, they need to do something. They need to contact us, and I'll give you the contact information in a minute. They have that landlord-tenant writ. In New Hampshire, under the RSA 540, it moves very, very quickly. There is a eviction notice that's served, then there is a landlord-tenant writ, and then the return date is very quick. So they have to get to the court quickly, file an appearance if they're going to contest the eviction. They need to know that. They need to know they have other rights with respect to their case that they can contest and that they can bring before the judge. So the best thing that they can do is to seek legal counsel. And they can do that with our organization and by contacting our companion group, 603 Legal Aid. It's 603-224-3333 or 800-639-5290. We also have a website, www.603legalaid.org, which has all kinds of information for tenants, individuals who are being foreclosed on with regard to that. You can fill out a form. There are intake specialists who can address people's questions. And even if we're not able to, we have a limited number of lawyers and a limited bandwidth that we can assist people, but even if we can't assign a particular lawyer to a case, we can always provide counsel and advice over the phone, give them an idea what they need to file, email them forms, and there's all kinds of things that we can do. And that can make a world of difference. The second thing that I would just mention is that they have rights under what's called RSA 540A. Tenants have rights, and landlords have rights, but mostly tenants invoke that statute. A landlord cannot turn off utilities without proper order, cannot seize property, cannot lock a tenant out, as I mentioned earlier. They cannot enter the apartment without authorization. They have to return security deposits. There's all kinds of rights under RSA 540A, and there's a right to petition the court if, in fact, those rights are being violated. The third thing that I would mention is that we work not just with tenants, but with homeowners who might be struggling with mortgage payments. We see that a lot with senior citizens who can't make the not only the mortgage payment, but they might not be able to make the property tax payment or utilities. And Attorney Stephanie Bray, who's our managing attorney in our Claremont office, oversees the New Hampshire Legal Assist the HAF program, which is a significant amount of federal funding that's still available. And I just thought I would give you a handout. We just got this today. I could just pass this around. Attorney Bray sent this to me, and very, very interesting that there was $40 million allocated to the state of New Hampshire, And at this point, I think there's still $25 million left for homeowners who may need assistance, who may be behind in their mortgage, property taxes, utilities, and such. So we would strongly recommend the people in that position to contact us.
So just a note for the public, the document being given out as part of our process towards the end, we'll accept it as a communication received after the agenda was prepared, and then include it in the minutes for this meeting.
The fourth issue that I think is important is that in addition to the HAF program, there's other community resources throughout the state and right here in Nashua. City Welfare Department, tenants have rights under RSA 165 to apply for welfare aid if they're in a situation where they can't provide for their own housing. There's a specific statute that requires the city to assist. Southern New Hampshire Services, you have the Front Door Agency right up on Concord Street. Family Promises is over in the old Infant Jesus School. I've toured that, and it's a beautiful facility. And there's many, many other resources that tenants, when I talk to them, aren't always aware of. Last but not least, I would just mention that tenants need to be aware of the impact of an eviction on their future ability to find housing. If once a tenant has an eviction, they have a mark on their record, and it's very, very difficult, especially in this market when there's just a limited supply, to obtain new housing. They can also lose their Section 8 voucher, which is a shattering occurrence. So tenants need to be aware of that. Sometimes tenants, the situation is they do need to move. They do need to find new housing. But sometimes we're able to negotiate with the landlord for a discretionary stay and a voluntary departure where they don't have that eviction on their record. And there's many other options that we can once we sit the client down or talk to the client, that we can talk to them and give them other ideas. I just want to mention, just in closing, just a couple of other things that are important, is that New Hampshire Legal Assistance provides free legal advice at both the Manchester Courthouse on the day that they do evictions, which usually is Thursdays, and here in Nashua, where 2 lawyers and an administrative advocate will come down, and we will provide free legal advice to tenants. And sometimes 6, 7, 8 tenants, we can assist and give them guidance. Sometimes we can work a payment arrangement out with the landlord. Sometimes we can't, but at least we can give them some idea. It's late in the process, for sure, because they're at their eviction hearing, but we've been able to assist, I would estimate, hundreds of clients. Just last week, Attorney Greenwald and I assisted six individuals and families that were being evicted in guiding them to, in some of the cases, we're able to work on payment arrangements. In other situation, we were able to work out a voluntary departure agreement with a discretionary stay where the individual would not have an eviction on their record. So we want you to be aware that that there is help out there. It's a situation that is just becoming acute with the lack of housing, lack of affordability, the lack of just available housing is a crisis, and that's a big concern to all of us. So just in closing, I would ask you that have anyone call us at 603-224-3333. We're happy to help, or at 800-639-5290, or go to our website at 603legalaid.org. That's all I have. Thank you.
I see Alderman Moran. Questions for the committee?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my guess is this isn't civil, and they're not entitled to appointment of counsel?
It's not criminal, so it's a civil. There is no right to counsel paid by the state, and that's where we step in. In criminal cases, there are where they face jail time or loss of rights, loss of due process.
So may I follow up? Yeah. So down in Mass, they have the housing court, and through that, and even though it's still civil, they can get counsel appointed through their version of the public defender's office. Is there any lobby attempts on your agency's part to try to change the RSAs to allow for that?
being brand new to New Hampshire legal assistance, I've been in court almost constantly defending eviction, so I'm not aware of the lobbying efforts. I'm sure that there are individuals there, and that's the first thing I'm gonna write down, and I'm gonna get you that answer. In terms of what legislation or lobbying efforts regarding an assigned right to legal counsel. And the key is getting it early, not having the lawyer be there at the day of the eviction hearing, because there's no way to prepare at that point.
Because I'm a social worker, so I do work down in Mass, and there's one particular person in Lowell that gets appointed to those housing, I have to remember his name, but he'll also get funds for services other than social worker, other than attorneys, counsel, and that's a big deal for a social worker to be assigned and not have to worry about the front door agency having staff or any other nonprofit having staff or the welfare agency, town welfare having funds to pay, getting someone to actually manage the issues at hand. That might be mental illness, addiction, and other things.
Absolutely. So it's a wonderful idea.
It'll probably take 15 to 20 years for anything up at the State House to actually move in that direction, but
Well,
using
we can always
Massachusetts is a good model to say, hey, it's happening in our neighbor's backyard.
I couldn't think of any reason, anything more important than having a right to counsel when you're losing your shelter. You could be literally thrown into the street.
And then eventually somehow be involved in the criminal justice system for various reasons.
So just a point of clarification, getting back to that, it's very important to go to file for an appearance. That's over here at Spring Street, the Hillsborough Court.
Hillsborough Circuit Court. Landlord-tenant is the only non-electronic filing, so it actually has to be done the old-fashioned way. And so it has to be hand-filed, but it's got to be done before what's called a return date. And the return date is usually just about a week after they're served the papers. Sometimes it takes 2 days to find the papers. And if it's a Friday, they come into us, it's a Monday, and we have to file it on Tuesday. So the lawyers in our office, I was talking to another lawyer the other day, he just drove up to Plymouth, literally, to file the appearance.
Has there been any concerns raised about access for people who have mobility issues or less means?
We have Attorney Chris Schott.
Specific.
Yeah, that's not my area, but Attorney Chris Schott is director of our fair housing. He's our fair housing project director, and I could ask him that question and get that answer for you and email you.
It seems like the ACLU has a lot of free time. Maybe they could jump on that.
I didn't hear you.
He didn't hear you.
I said the ACLU seems to have a lot of time on their hands. Maybe they could help. Alderman Clee, I think you had.
Yes.
and
Thank you.
Tebow, I see you over there.
Thank you so much. One of the things that struck me as you were talking is you are actually at the crisis mode. Because quite often I try to tell my constituents when they're having issues to seek out Southern New Hampshire for maybe assistance with fuel or something of that nature. You actually get called in when they've gotten the eviction notice. It's
Way down
such
the
a
road.
moment. Yeah. Knowing that, if someone knows that there's a chance that they're having a hard time, they're struggling, trying to make that mortgage payment or that rent payment, should they be reaching out to you or should they be doing what I'm telling them? Speak to our welfare department here, get a hold of Southern New Hampshire. I'm giving them all these front door agencies. I'm giving them all these resources to help them with all that. But should they try to kind of give you guys a heads up saying, I'm struggling, can you help?
It's always better when they call early because there's so much more we can do if they call early. Many times we'll take a case and they've been served an eviction notice. That's not the landlord-tenant writ. I often will have either I will write to the landlord directly or the client will talk to the landlord. Many landlords are very, very willing to work with tenants. They just need to have communication. And sometimes the tenant is, for whatever reason, could be a language issue, could be, they could be fearful of authority. They don't want to reach out to the landlord. Many landlords, I have found, are cooperative and will listen and work a payment plan out. We just did it the other day with Attorney Mayer at the National Housing Authority, who's a wonderful lawyer. And, but yes, the earlier the better.
Okay. I can tell you that sometimes it's simply just embarrassed that they haven't been able to pay and it's almost like I'm not going to answer the phone because I know they're calling me, and it's until they put that notice on the door that this is your notice of eviction. It's been 3 months back and so on. So there are all kinds of issues as you brought up, but sometimes it's just simply embarrassed that they don't have the money to pay for it. It's
fear.
just a humiliating feeling. It could be a variety of different things. Two more questions, if I may, Mr. Chairman. One of the things is you said that you give the free legal advice, and you mentioned here at Spring Street.
Exactly.
But you mentioned a day, you said Thursday in Manchester. Is there a specific day that
It's
you're
usually
here
Thursday.
in Nashua?
It's usually Thursday in Nashua, although last week I know it was Friday. The lawyers were down there on Friday. I handled it the previous Thursday. And the court clerks will send us the list ahead of time, so we'll have the lists of clients or tenants who are being evicted with us when we go down there, and then we'll immediately reach out. Judge Curran is wonderful. He will make an announcement that we're there. We wear a badge so that they can see us, and the response has been very, very heartwarming in terms of seeking out our involvement. There's also a court mediator there who can assist. In the court mediator, sometimes if negotiations get difficult, the mediator will come in and help us reach a settlement.
Thank you. I know that my constituents who've had to file that paperwork because they've had the conviction and so on, they want to fight the eviction. I'm sorry, not conviction, eviction. They want to fight that eviction, and they got befuddled just by the paperwork alone. And as you said, it's not done electronically. They have to take time off from work. They're barely paying the bills now, and they have to take more time off to go to the court and to do this. If there was another way of being able to do that, if you want to talk to your lobbyists about that,
About the
making
electronic
that more
filing.
electronic, because that is the truth. Trying to find the time to get away from work to go and file those papers is hard for some of these people.
It is, and when they contact us, we can do it for them. And I'll
Okay.
actually overnight the paperwork to the courthouse immediately. The
Right.
key is just calling that number, getting a hold of us.
I appreciate that. And I did have one more question, and right now it's gone, so I'm going to let someone else speak, if you don't mind.
I believe Alderman Tebow had his hand up.
All right, I'll take it. Thank you, Mr. Chair. To add to a couple of things that are out there, working from Eversource, I see it all the time with utilities, and there is a tremendous amount of people that get support through either the state or through Eversource, and I think the problem sometimes is people don't know those resources are out there. So Eversource, for instance, we do something called, if someone qualifies, a New Start program, where if they pay a certain amount, they forgive a certain amount. And so, they can work off their bill over the course of a year. There's other things with payment arrangements, budget billing, and then there's the hardship programs, the discount programs that come from the state. If they call 211, they can, hook up and try to get some of that worked. And people can qualify that may not think they can qualify for that, and I think it's important that they know that. Also, Liberty Utilities probably has similar things, but I see it all the time. I don't know how many accounts I pull up that have hardship with it, and so certainly I think people should go and, see what they can qualify for. And like you said, they can't shut off, the landlords can't shut off. If they call us and they say, we want this shut off, we don't do it if there's a tenant in there.
Right.
So that's not the process. And, a general comment here is I think this whole thing is, I guess, annoying. And the reason why, and I'll say why, is because it's a problem we need to solve. And I think it's solvable somehow. But it's a hard thing because there's a lot of things going on with all this stuff, right? This stuff is great. The stuff that the legal group does is fantastic. But then it's kind of like down the road, right? It's like, how are we solving the root causes of these problems that lead us to get to court, right? And, why can't they pay their bills? What causes are causing that we as a city should be looking into to fix, right? And it goes along with the unsheltered too, right? We know there's some people that just need the space that we don't have a space for, or that we have people that won't go to a space. We have people that have mental health problems. We have people that are caught in the drug crisis, and we need to try to find a way to help them. And how do we fix those problems? And that's a lot of problems. That's a big load, but I am about wanting to solve these crises. I want to solve the unsheltered. I want to solve the opioid epidemic here in Nashua. Obviously, it's going on in Manchester. I know Mayor Craig's had to deal with it quite a bit, and my mom's hometown of Berlin might have probably a similar thing, because that city's been in rough shape for a lot of years. Hopefully, it's coming back. But I want to know more about some of the whys of the root causes, and how can we, like in a perfect world, if we had all the money in the world, if we had all the resources in the world, how do we fix all these things? Because I know and I've talked to Alderman Lopez about it, some people don't want to get help. They don't want to go into housing, or they just don't want help. And how do you deal with somebody that doesn't want help, right? Or how can we do more things to get them help? So in this whole discussion that we're having here, I would love to hear more about ways that the city can help. I was hoping we'd have more people here tonight, just because I think it's that important of an issue in Nashua. And I know there's a lot of vacations and stuff, and so I'm not chastising anyone. I was hoping, I wasn't commanding that they be here. I don't want to sound like that, but I certainly think it's a big issue, and I think we're going to need to talk about it even more and more down the road, not just tonight. So thank you, Alderman Lopez.
To that end, I'm committed to the conversation, and I'm pretty hard to ignore. So I won't be letting up on making sure that we have informed departmental contributions. And I think more needs to be done by the Board of Aldermen, particularly to discuss this issue here, because the city's doing a lot of work, and there's a lot of groups that are that are doing a lot of work, but we're not necessarily engaged in that or involved in it. The continuum of care meets every single month. And so when groups like that or the homeless outreach committees are meeting, then we are somewhat subject to them inviting us and us choosing to go, versus here at a legislative committee, this is where we find out how we should be crafting legislation or what we should be doing for it in the view of the public. So the public can see where things originate, why we're doing them, and how important they are. And then I would just add, as a point of personal privilege, as it was pointed out that there's the impression that some people don't want the help. I would just clarify that I have never met someone who's living outside who doesn't want a better place to live. I have met many people who are living outside who are forced to do acrobatics and jump through hoops in order to meet specific program guidelines, because there isn't a strict housing first access model in place. One of the biggest and most obvious examples of that is we will wait until it is dangerously cold out to shelter anybody who may have had a drink during the day or struggles with substance use, because up until that point, we don't have a wet shelter, and we don't have programs that will take people under any circumstances, no questions asked whatsoever. All of our existing emergency shelter services and even the not exactly emergency shelter, but rescue missions have guidelines that need to be followed, and there are going to be people who are not able to follow those guidelines because of where they're at. So I've never met anybody who wants to be outside. I've only met people who aren't going to meet the criteria or have had very bad, very traumatic experiences, or are absolutely terrified of those residential programs because they've had really bad experiences, in those types of programs. I'd also point out that at present, our emergency shelter capacity at the city is extremely limited. So maybe 10 to 15 years ago, every now and then I'd run into someone while working at the shelters that would be like, oh, I just, decided I'm gonna stay at the shelter for a couple of days, save up some money and get a car or get back on my feet or whatever. And these are people who have very little resources, and to them at that time, it made sense to go to an emergency shelter, hit the reset button, lose all of their belongings and autonomy to when they get up, who they live with, how they eat and all that, and use that as a resource. Even that's not an option right now. And that's why it's really important for us to be talking about tenant rights and be making sure that all of the members of the Board of Aldermen, when approached by constituents, know about programs like legal assistance and what they can offer as resources, because we need to do everything we can to avoid putting anybody else into a system that's already way over capacity. Because we won't be able to help the people who have the more acute issues and the people with the more esoteric needs, like substance abuse, if we have too many residents that are evicted, that evictions could have been prevented. Alderman Timmons?
Thank you. Well, I serve with a lot of people. Thank you for comment and thank you for this information. I'm going to say that first. I serve with a lot of underserved people, a lot. They talk to me about things that you guys don't bring up in here. So one is the fear of the landlord, okay? The fear of the landlord, meaning to them, is that if they make any complaints, they're already struggling, okay? They make any complaints, they may be evicted, or their rent may go up and force their eviction because they can't pay the rent. That's the main thing. So even when things are wrong in the apartment, they won't say anything.
Exactly.
They just won't.
What I'm seeing now
Mr. Mayor?
too, I'm sorry,
No, I'm calling on you.
oh, I'm sorry, is that we're seeing the use of 24/7 cameras in the apartment buildings where every move, everything the tenant does is being video recorded. And it's very intimidating to the tenants to have that going on. It's very troubling to me.
May I?
Alderman Timmons, did you have a follow-up?
Also, another thing, a lot of I'm going to go over to the homeowners assistance program. We need to let the underserved know this program is here. They're not watching these board members. They don't even know who the board of aldermen is. They don't even know what an alderman is. So I'm saying that we need to focus on how to get the information out to these people that's underserved and deal with that. Because like Mr. Lopez over here, he does know a lot of people. They know him. Out of all the aldermen, they know Tom Lopez. For some strange reason, I know the reason, because he's out there in the public. And these people tell me, oh, I know Tom, he's great. But they don't know anybody else other than me. But yeah, the point is they don't know this information. And so in my mind, I'm thinking we should have a homeowner/tenant event, maybe at the library, to get this information. I got a lot of resources as well, and I can put them out on those resources that they're not political, they're not in any particular format where these people know. They don't go to the city's website, but they go to other websites that this information can get out there. So what I did is I took a picture of it, because then they know. But what we need to do is have a meeting and stuff that you just brought in today. This is very valuable information that they don't know about.
We would love to work with you.
Okay, great, because one of the things that they, I was amazed that you said, the due process. Well, they don't usually have a due process. And they know that if they don't come up with the money, and then their landlords become very nasty, and I've seen it personally, that they don't know what to do. They lost. I have people living with me because they're so afraid that if they do anything else, and I mean, I only have limited space, but I have people live with me all the time. They're not homeless. They're not out on the street. You miss those people.
Exactly.
Because they're living on people's couches.
They're not even counted.
I see that as well. Also, I want to make another point. When someone is in the hospital, I have a constituent right now that's in the hospital. She's been in the hospital for 3 months because of a back surgery she had in Nashville. Now she's down in Boston. And she said, what am I gonna do? I can't pay. Now, the landlord she's in the hospital. The landlord is saying, you gotta move your stuff. In other words, he already evicted her before she had a chance to come out of the hospital. What is it that we can do for her? I have no idea.
Well, up until the COVID money the COVID money is essentially gone. When the COVID money was still available, we could access that money. That's been a big concern lately. That money is essentially depleted.
And let me just tell you, what bothered me about this particular tenant is that during COVID, her rent went sky high. The landlord upped her rent like $400 or $500 a month so he can get the COVID money. But he didn't go down when COVID was over.
Right.
That happened a lot, and I don't hear anybody talking about that. So I have a lot of mixed feelings about the tenants being screwed versus the landlords being screwed. I know the landlords want their money, but I see a lot of stuff that's not right that the landlord does. And I also see that I was like, did you pay your rent? I was paying my rent until you went up to $300 more a month. They just can't do it. So, and those are that population that I see. And those are the ones that vote for me, by the way, because they know that I help. And it's not lip service. I actually out there giving them money, and I'm not a rich person by no stretch of imagination. I give you $20, I give you something to keep you going. But just because I don't want them to be homeless. So that population, I don't think we're seeing them because they're not really out there on the street. They're couch surfing. And a lot of times, just so you know this, a lot of times the tenants are helping other families. They're helping their children.
Right.
That happened a whole lot, well, my daughter needed some place to stay, or I had to pay my daughter rent, so for her children, and then in the meantime, they're not paying their own. So it's like, catch-22.
I'm doing it too.
Mr. Mayor?
See, yeah. So, I mean, those are my comments, and so I have a really strong view on landlords, and it's not positive. Because what I see isn't. They don't paint, they don't clean, they don't do the things a tenant lived there 10 years and they haven't done one single thing to the apartment. The rent is always paid on time. The minute they don't pay the rent, then they're out on the street. But all the time that they got away with just collecting money, they was like a horse, they just collecting the money and not doing anything to the units. I don't think that's right either. I mean, I see a lot of that. So I'm seeing things that it's just simply not right. And they won't complain because they're afraid that they're gonna be evicted. They don't wanna be homeless. They don't want their rent to go up, so they say absolutely nothing. And they live in month by month, not even on a lease, just month by month, for years. So they're afraid that, okay, you've been living here for years without a lease, I can just throw you out any minute. So I don't know how that would work when you've been in the place 5-6 years and you never had your lease expired, but never renewed the lease, but yet you've been paying every single month. They're afraid that if they make any complaints, they will be thrown out.
Mr. Mayor, do you have a response? Any suggestions?
I absolutely agree, and it's not only the landlords, it's also the property managers too that are designated by the landlords, that the tenants are very fearful of. And I've got many stories of tenants not wanting to basically defend themselves
Right.
or to have due process out of fear. So I agree with all of that.
Alderman Clee, I see you've been patient.
No, that's okay. No, I gave up my right credit because I couldn't remember my question. I have remembered my question and I wrote it down so I don't forget again. But I do want to make some comments. To Alderman Timmons' point, I have been bringing up the fear issue, especially when we were talking about bed bugs and so on. I know a lot of tenants that have been afraid of that. And I also, for the public that's listening, want to know that not all landlords are bad landlords.
No,
We
they're
do
not.
have
They're-
some really good ones. I can tell you, I have an extraordinary one who has not gone up on rent. He owns 2 buildings. He has not gone up on rent in decades. And when tenants can't pay, he works with them to mow a lawn, change a light bulb, do something like that. So there are some very, very good landlords, and I don't want it to get out there that we think that landlords are not.
I want to
But
clarify,
there's
my
some very
landlord
bad.
is outstanding.
Yeah,
Great job.
and some landlords are very bad, so,
By the
so
way,
to your point.
I want to say
Yeah.
something. There's no absolute.
Right,
Okay,
exactly,
so we
perfect.
have good landlords,
Yeah,
but we have
yeah.
some really bad ones that
Exactly.
overshadow the really good ones that's not talked about.
Exactly,
Okay, just so you
yeah.
know, I
Yeah.
know there's good landlords out there, okay?
I know you
happen
do.
to be one, so.
I know you do, just for the public, so they don't think that
Okay.
we're picking on landlords. So, I think Mr. Mayor wanted to make a response.
Mr. Mayor?
Yeah, I would just say that, as I mentioned earlier, we have landlords come into the housing, the eviction clinic on a Thursday morning and will work with us wonderfully to figure out a solution. So I've met many good, ethical, kind landlords, understanding landlords. But as you said, no absolutes.
Alderman Clee, you made some comments, but you did have a question.
I actually have 2 questions, and again, one is in reference to, so at-will tenants, which is, I believe, what you refer to as month-to-month, do they have any right of termination? So do they have to give them 30 days in order to terminate, because it's an at-will?
30 days,
So it is
30 days. If it's non-payment of rent, it can be 7 days. So they're at constant fear of eviction. the first thing I'll do when we have an intake, every Wednesday morning, we have a weekly review of all the incoming cases, and all the lawyers throughout the state, we connect via Microsoft Teams and go over each and every case, and the lawyers are very diligent about looking at all the facts. And that's the first thing I look for, is there's a lease. If there's a lease there, there's something I can hang on to, and I can, or at least term, I can hang on to, and that's another defense. But if there's not a lease, that's very difficult, and it's becoming rare now because there's so many people want to move in. Their attitude is, I don't need to have a new lease. I don't need to hold them in that spot. There's 5 people who will take that spot.
Yeah, that is sad. And to my question that I had forgotten, and this is probably something you're not going to be able to answer, but Nashua being the second largest city in the state of New Hampshire, why do we not have legal aid here and we have to run to Manchester?
I had a feeling. I had a feeling I would get that question, and I would just say it's way above my pay grade. But I can tell you it is in discussion, and people are talking about it, and that's all I'll say right now.
May I just quickly follow up? Just to a comment. I mean, the fact of the matter is Hillsborough County, the court system, there's north and south. There's one in Nashua, there's one in Manchester. The court alone knew enough to kind of split up. I know they do different things for different people and so on, but and Hillsborough County doesn't even take over all of Manchester, only a small part of Manchester is part of Hillsborough County. So I would like to see something here closer to home. The thing is that people can pick up a phone for you, they can meet you at the court, but to be able to have something within our city that is the second largest city. I look at Berlin obviously needs it. I don't know about Portsmouth, but Concord needs it. Manchester needs it. Nashua needs it. And you guys are wonderful group of people. I appreciate you coming here and I appreciate everything they do, but I'd love to see an office here that would help. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Alderman Moran?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to go back to the landlord conversation because I think Alderman Timmons makes a very good point. But I think we should be clear to members, the public at large, who we're really talking about. Because I've experienced this. Slumlords is probably the best term to use because it's well known. And I'll give I lived on Kinsley Street in a slumlords building. And I remember him telling me he bought it for like 80 grand in the 90s. And I just looked it up quickly now. It's worth about $700,000. And I know he's getting about $2,000 per each unit. There's 4 units. And if you go by, he's removed the windows. He's have sun windows, but a lot of them have been removed. There's no changes to the outside. And on the inside, I've had clients have been there since. It's not a lot of things happening. And I remember a conversation with him and people like him. It's, why would I want to do improvements when my taxes will go up and I won't make as much money off of it? So you're reeling in, what's that, $8,000 a month from 4 units, and you bought the house for 60, 80 grand, and now it's worth, that's 3, 4, 500%, I don't know. But those are the type of people I think Alderwoman Timmons is talking about.
Exactly.
Not like where Alderman Lopez lives in a very reputable building, and those people are going to follow the law, and they're going to make sure that they follow a process. And I've been involved in situations with someone just like that. Get out. And make you feel like you have no rights. Leave. I don't want you here. Whatever intimidation it might be. And that's what it's great to say not all landlords are bad, but I think we need to know who we're talking about. And sure as hell, I know Alderman Timmons knows who we're talking about. And it's those types of folks who take advantage of non-English speakers, single moms. When I moved into this place, he was trying to take the previous tenant to court who was fleeing domestic violence. And he said, Bridges packed her up and moved her and I can't get my rent. That's the type of person we're talking about. And people need to know that it's happening because that's what's happening every day in the city.
To that point, that was why I think it's important to have these meetings here, not just for the purposes of the public, but I do think that if we're going to create any policy to address any systemic issues, it should originate in committee discussion or at least a public forum. But it's important for the other aldermen to know these resources are out there, because the public can't afford us to have bystander effect and to have people reach out and say, oh my God, I'm getting evicted, and for us to just be like, oh shoot, let's find someone else who can handle that. That uses up the time they have where they need to be told, go to the courthouse and contest it, call the legal assistance. And I think by making sure that we educate our fellow aldermen as well as our constituents that there are resources, there are processes in place, that may make the difference between someone hesitating to stand up for their rights and embarking on a whole journey that's going to take them years, if not decades, to come back from. I think it's very important that we look at reducing the number of people who become homeless now so that we can handle addressing the people who we maybe missed high fives on or missed the boat on, or are in situations now that are intimidating and, alien and, seem overwhelming. We're the ones who get to go home at night. So we need to make sure that we're stepping up for people who have that in jeopardy. I did have two questions I wanted to ask Mr. Mara. I know the conversation's getting a little long. But first, you mentioned that the city has an obligation in terms of city welfare providing assistance. Is there an actual definition of what that assistance is?
It is. It's under RSA 165:1, Roman numeral 1. And it's like a lot of legal language, it's not the clearest in the world, but whenever a person in any town is poor and unable to support himself, comma, he shall be relieved and maintained by the overseers of public welfare of such town, comma, whether or not he has residence there. That is the key phrase in RSA 165 that requires the towns and cities to make sure someone's not unhoused. They have their own regulations and they have to follow the regulations, but there are many other people at New Hampshire Legal Assistance who are far more skilled in that than I am. Mm-hmm. One thing I would mention is that we actually have someone on call every day for local welfare cases that they've got in an emergency situation. If someone was in their car and needed assistance immediately, I was the person last week, I think it was Thursday or Friday. We immediately will jump into action, and necessarily we will drive to the city or town to assist that person to fill out the application. Sometimes they may have difficulty filling out an application, but we're there to do that as well.
I only bring it up because our welfare guidelines contain a lot of eligibility criteria, which
Mm-hmm.
always concerns me, because sometimes the eligibility criteria might be, oh, we aren't working with you because we worked with you previously and it didn't go well, so now you're not eligible. And it makes me feel pretty uncomfortable. I know our departments report that they refer people to nonprofits and that there's all of this assistance like the soup kitchen and the rescue missions and everything, but if there's no room at the soup kitchen, referring somebody to the soup kitchen on like a Friday afternoon doesn't really constitute assistance in my book.
In local welfare is the last resort many times. But I've made a list of things to report back to you on, and one of them I'm going to provide you additional information on local welfare and how we see that and how we can assist people.
My last question, I might be complicated, but what constitutes a tenant? If somebody's in a transitional housing program, are they a tenant? If somebody comes in through a sober house, are they a tenant?
It's a difficult question. It's a legal question, and every case is different. Under RSA 540B, there's what's called shared facility, and many times landlords will try to evict someone without all the protections as a tenant. But if they have a lease and they have a defined space as their own, they're defined as a tenant. And in that setting, more likely than not, the person who either owns or controls that facility will probably pursue removal under 540B, which is a shared facility law. Less
Just out of
protection.
curiosity, does the lease have to literally have lease on the top and be called a lease, or is it that a legal agreement between two parties or something?
I don't know the answer to the question, whether or not a lease has to have the title on it. I don't think so. I think if it reads as a lease, it'll be a lease. Whether or not the title lease is on top, it can be
I think
agreement.
a lot of places might have program agreements or something like that that might constitute a lease, but
Yeah.
ultimately, I think it's important for people who are affected by this to contact legal aid and get direct opinions with their exact cases, rather than hoping I can anticipate them or someone here might have heard of something. If you are facing an eviction or, homelessness, use the resources, every resource you can to avoid it.
And there's a
And
lot of
there's people on
resources
the other
on the
side
website, on the website too, you can go to, and there's all kinds of pamphlets and forms and information for people.
Okay. Any further, Alderman, please go.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and again, thank you so much for coming here. I want to give an example of something that happened with one of my constituents. They called me quite distressed. They only had like a week or 2 weeks before the landlord was going to lock the doors, as they kept saying. They were going to be out on the street and so on. I did not know about legal assistance, and for that, I apologize to these people. But I did send them to our welfare department, and I did send them to the front door agency, and I did follow up with these organizations. And the problem with these particular people were they were out of work. He was anyways, and I think she'd been out of work, was only getting some kind of Social Security assistance. He had applied, didn't have it yet. So as you can imagine, funds were that way. When I spoke to, and I'm hoping that I'm saying the right organization, I do believe it was a front door agency who does try to help with catching people up and so on. One of the issues that they have to show is that once they help you catch up, you're going to be able to pick it up from there.
Right.
And sometimes that's not always the case. Would you be able to help in those situations?
Absolutely.
Would you do mediation between the landlord and the...
Absolutely, and there's actually, in the eviction notice that's on the court has an eviction notice that's legal, and there's mediation offered right in that form to have some type of early resolution. The key is contact with the landlord. Even if you may not agree with the landlord, is to have communication, at least attempt that. The worst thing you can do is to just avoid the problem. Or the earlier you can address these things, the more likely there'll be a positive outcome.
Madam, if you don't mind, I wanted to interject
Sure,
a question.
please.
Does the court mediation that's included in that, is that something that somebody would be charged for?
No, it's
Okay,
free.
because I think that would probably be very intimidating to someone facing eviction, that like, oh God, I gotta get a lawyer now that someone else picks?
And I'm just going to add to that, Mr. Mack from Welfare, I have spoken with him, and he echoes the same words, early. When you
Exactly.
think that there's a problem, contact us right away, because the system does work slow sometimes within the city and so on. But my concern is what Alderman Lopez kind of brought up, people that have had trouble before, and we work out deals with them so they just pay a little bit, but in this particular case, they weren't going to have those funds. We all knew that within 3 months or 6 months, it was unlikely they were going to be able to dig out of this hole. So those are problems that with people who fear ending up on the street and so on.
Heartbreaking.
So, anything that you guys do to help with that, thank you.
Alderman Timmons?
Thank you, Alderman Lopez. I have a question regarding income levels. Is there a guideline on the income requirement, eligibility?
I don't have those, but those are done by all of our intake people in Concord and in Manchester and throughout the state. There's certain income guidelines. And so most of the people that we do serve are very low income. But yes, there are. I don't have those in front of me, and I'm going to add that to my list. Another good question.
Before we conclude this discussion, can I get a motion to accept the paperwork?
So moved.
All in favor to adding this to our agenda? Say
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. All right, Mr. Mayor, if you want to stay and watch, you're welcome, but I feel like we should release you because we have a couple pieces of business to do here.
I've had a long day, but I can definitely stay for a little bit. Sure.
It's up to you. Your
Absolutely.
option.
Absolutely. Happy to.
Communications?
I'm sorry. From Julian Long, Urban Programs Manager, in regards to Urban Programs Department updates, April 2023. From Julian Long, Programs Manager, regarding Urban Programs Department updates, May 2023. From Julian Long, Urban Programs Manager, in regards to Community Development Grant Reallocation Opportunity Networks and Plus Company. From Julian Long, Urban Programs Manager, in regards Urban Programs Department updates, June 2023.
So just to clarify, Manager Long is not bored and just sending us all these letters.
Right.
We haven't met since May, so they've been kind of piling up. And he's very good about informing us and letting us know about legislation that's coming up shortly. So without objection, we'll accept these communications and place them on file. Unfinished business,
There is none?
new business resolutions.
Excuse me. Resolution 23-132, relative to the acceptance of $150,000 from the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. Mr. Chairman, I motion to recommend, I guess, final approval?
Yeah, good question. It just
To rec-
says
to
blank, but I'm
recommend-
assuming we want final.
To recommend approval.
Yeah, because this does have to go to the full board.
Yeah, so
Um,
approval.
Urban Manager Long or a representative from that department, would you like to come up and give us a quick synopsis? Script is wrong and we're all thumbs over here.
Good evening, my name is Sam Durfee, Planning Manager for the City of Nashua. So this is a grant, the Housing Opportunity Planning Grant from the New Hampshire Housing Finance Authority. This is part of the Invest New Hampshire monies that were ARPA funds, and this grant was made available to municipalities in basically 3 stages. Basically an analysis of the regulations, an audit, kind of looking at areas where you could make changes to strengthen and encourage housing development, and then also money for regulatory development, writing of code. So we went for the latter 2 stages. This came at a great time because, as you know, we are about to embark on a comprehensive overhaul for our land use regulations. So while we had already sent out an RFP, we had selected a consultant. This opportunity came by, we paused because we wanted to chase this money. We were successful in being awarded, and then we worked out, scope and contracts and all of that, and here we are requesting acceptance of these funds. This represents about a 66% increase to the budget we already had, and this will really guarantee a lot of focused funding for looking at our housing regulations, which is really the goal of this grant. And I'm confident that we will have sufficient funding to really develop a robust code and make sure that it is inclusive of everything that was painstakingly detailed in the master plan, while also offering us some opportunity to do some additional visioning in neighborhoods that did not receive that level of attention during the master plan process.
Yeah, I think Alderman Como's ward might particularly be interested in that. Its former alderman noted that there wasn't representation from her ward there, so I think that would definitely be a good opportunity. And from the discussion tonight, I'm not sure the city is even aware of how many different programs are operating different ways, different capacities. How many sober houses do we have here in Nashua? So these are areas that I think would be great in addition to the master planning things. Any other comments from the committee members? Oh, and if I mischaracterized what I was hearing from the grant, feel free to speak up. Did I get that right, or was I like just adding things that I plucked up?
No, that's accurate. Thank
Okay,
you.
just making sure. Alderman Cleve?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm definitely in favor of obviously accepting any monies, but especially what you plan to use it for. We've talked from the planning department, from the Board of Aldermen, from every aspect of it, that we really do need to, update some of our land use regulations. I know that even Alderman Moran and so on has spoken about certain types of zoning and different things like this. So when we say land use regulations, we're talking specific to the, to looking at how we have things zoned, how we use lands for. When I did the vaping ordinance, so something like that, all of that thing would be taken into consideration. We would kind of overhaul and look at everything we're doing, because that seems like a lot of work.
Yes,
So,
Chapter 190, all of our land use regulations are on the table. So it's comprehensive.
Thank you for taking that, and thank you for waiting for these funds to come available, so I appreciate that.
Will the urban plannings or community development office be creating like a virtual home for this? There's been a number of programs that have kind of been launched in the past, and it's hard to navigate through the city's website and find like anything. So part of that is just the indexing is antiquated, and it's definitely not run by Google. But being able to make sure that the public is able to participate in these kind of studies is helpful to both the vendors, the departments, and us.
Yes, so public outreach is going to take many forms, one of which having a digital repository of the code, the drafts thereof, summaries of meetings, videos of meetings, will all be on a website that it will be the consultant's responsibility to develop and maintain. In addition to that, we will be developing a robust schedule of outreach opportunities. This takes many forms because there are so many different facets of the code, some of which are going to be very neighborhood-specific visioning sessions. Others will be kind of, open book, come have a coffee, talk about what zoning is and, broader conversations. And we really want to have this available at all levels and in different mediums as well, so that it can be as engaging as possible with the community, so that any questions can be asked and hopefully answered, and all of that will be incorporated into the final document.
Very good. Alderman Moran?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is your department engaging with anyone with institutional knowledge to ensure that we can expand the use of land use codes to allow for maybe treatment programs, or maybe not so much sober homes, because those are, I think, just sober people living together. I don't
Very
think,
complex term.
but maybe like sober treatment living, or something where maybe they're living in the home,
Mm-hmm.
and then there's a counselor or a psychiatrist that visits once a week or something like that, that allows them not to be all squished into Ward 4, or Amherst Street, or
Mm-hmm.
Northeastern, whatever, because I think there's something to be said that someone can have treatment, just like the ADA allows us to book group homes pretty much wherever they really want to be, even despite whatever the city might say, where you can put, a group home of disabled people wherever, and nurses and doctors can come in. We should be doing the same thing for mental health and SUD. And it's just something that I've been personally started working on in my business life, and I've have encountered a couple barriers, and I just am curious, are we going to jam-pack them all into the same areas that they're already in?
Sure. So I completely agree. That's a hugely important topic for the city, specifically for Nashua. To answer your question directly, are we going to be working with any essentially consultants focused in that area? I guess the answer would be no, because our consultant is primarily code-based. However, in terms of institutional knowledge, a lot of staff, planning staff, has had a lot of experience working with the individuals operating, opening, and going through the process for establishing these sorts of uses, as there's been a huge need, and we've been trying to process these as quickly as possible. Recognizing the geographic concentration of these, that is certainly something that we want to look at, and we want to hear from individuals in the community. I plan to meet with every single alderman individually and understand, your key areas of interest, and talk about these sorts of things, because your lived experience in this community is far greater than mine, and I highly value that input. So any information like that you can share with us through the process is hugely helpful.
May I? Sorry. I'm sure Alderman Lopez and I would love to be involved, and other folks that are passionate about inclusion. Because I know I've had the conversation with Alderwoman Klee about places in Ward 3 that might benefit from a facility, like I just mentioned, that allows someone to be in a residential community versus this whole, you have to be in the urban section. Right. So.
To put not too fine a point on it, having the hub for Safe Station, like surrounded by bars, wasn't the best scenario ever. It was just somewhat limited by where people would tolerate it.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions? Oh, Alderman Clee?
Thank you. You used a word that I liked when you talked about the outreach and education. I think the recent planning board meetings with the asphalt and so on, and probably other upcoming, I think the community, I know I got a lot of phone calls. What does TOD mean? What does the GI, the general index, mean? What does it mean by an overlay? I think for those that, it took me a few minutes, but the moment it was explained, the light bulb came on and I understand. But I think for the average person, they don't realize that maybe they're living in an area that's an overlay that allows general industry, allows residential, allows different types of things like that. I think so. And we do need overlays as much as I don't like them. We do need them because we all do have to live together, and you don't want to just put all industry in one area and not have any kind of type of residence. So I think education, and you mentioned outreach, you mentioned speaking to all of us, but even possibly having like ward meetings where you might talk to me, but then you're going to talk, and trust me, there are going to be some people in my ward that are going to be against anything. And I hate the term NIMBY, but we all have a little bit of NIMBY in us, but that are not going to want it, and then there are going to be other sections and so on that's going to say, we need this here, and we need to discuss what can happen. I mean, just even residential areas, when we talk about, R30s and, R15s and all of that, people don't quite understand. So I think if you could do a ward by ward, or maybe a couple wards, 4 and 3 or something together, I think would be really helpful to educate the public. As it was pointed out, people aren't watching here, and then it would be incumbent about me to get people there for you to talk to, and I usually don't have any problem with that. But.
Literally incumbent?
or the incumbent,
As
yes.
the incumbent.
As the incumbent, or whoever sits in the seat next year. So yes. Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Thank you.
If I may, ward meetings are part of the scope, in which the scope is part of the contract, which will be going soon after these funds are accepted at the full board. I'll be submitting the contract to the finance committee, so that can go through the process, and that scope is attached and can be viewed, and you can see all the work that we intend to do.
Thank you so much for all of that. I appreciate it for all of you.
All right, no further questions from the committee? Then we have a motion to recommend final passage. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Next.
Thank you.
R23-135, relative to amending the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Annual Action Plan for fiscal year 2023 relative to the Community Development Block Grant, CDBG. Mr. Chairman, I motion to recommend approval. Just recommend approval. Should have stopped there with the period.
Okay. Is there anybody who'd like to speak to that? Alderman Timmons.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I have a question. What are we amending in this relative amendment?
Well, that's where the presentation would have come in.
Oh,
Yeah.
so, okay. All right, thank you.
Quickly, Manager Long, she's impatient.
Good evening, everyone. Julian Long, Urban Programs Manager. So this is a pretty simple transfer from one project to another of funds. Which one came in over? Okay, so yes, the Plus company came in over its estimate and the amount of funds originally awarded, while the Opportunity Networks project came in under what was estimated and awarded. So we're transferring the $3,000 that we have left over from Opportunity Networks to Plus Company for this. And it doesn't make up the entire shortfall, but we've chatted with Plus Company and they're able to make up the rest of the amount needed to complete the project.
Manager Long, correct me if I get this wrong, but I'm just going to try to summarize for Alderman Timmons. We presented the plan, we approved the plan, we're amending the plan that we approved via legislation to allow us to do this transfer.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Any further questions, anybody? Okay. Oh, Alderman?
No.
Timmons? No.
That answered my question.
Excellent. Okay, so without objection, or I guess I can do it that way. All those in favor of recommending final passage?
Aye.
Aye. And opposed? None? Guessing? Okay. Madam
Thank you.
Clerk, new business? Thank you, Manager Long, appreciate it.
There is none?
Table to committee,
There is none.
general discussion. Alderman Tebow?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to mention I had another comment about the whole sheltered, unsheltered situation. So Nashua is growing fast and growing in a way, and I don't mean growing by necessarily people, although, because we're pretty much full on, where people can live, but it's going in a fast-moving way. We're a great city. We continue to move in ways of development, economic development, and with this carousel of progress, I'm hoping that we make sure we're not forgetting the people that may get cut out of this as things get more expensive and keep growing. I'm concerned that it's going to cause even more of a crisis than we already have. And so I think it's important that not only are we looking at the unsheltered, but to, something Alderwoman Timmons said earlier, we have, we like to not use the word homeless because we want to use unsheltered, but there's also homeless that are sheltered, living on someone's couch, squatting somewhere, where they can find space or a friend's house or whatever, that they don't have a place to call home other than, going from friend to friend or house to house. And we want to keep the city great. And part of keeping the city great is making sure people have the right to simple things like food, shelter, obviously education. And it's a problem that if it was easy to fix, all of the cities in this country would have fixed it long ago. But we don't want to be one of those that doesn't try to fix it, right? It's complex, but I think it needs to continue, and I know Alderman Lopez has done a great job to continue to push that agenda, and I think he's going to continue to do that, which is great. But I think we can't turn a blind eye. Just because I'm in the South End doesn't mean I'm not thinking about people that, when I go to the library, see sleeping inside a wedge, between near the doors with a shopping cart, and they're sleeping under it. I'm thinking of how does that person get someplace where they need whatever kind of help they need, whether it's shelter or some other means. We got to do more with mental health. We got to do more with opioid crisis. We got to do more with finding shelter and making sure we have places for people to go. And then the ways to them to get back on their feet. And how do we do that in this economy that's very difficult for a lot of people? And, some people will go out there and say, well, I'm not saying this, but some people may say, well, that person deserves it. They did this, they did that. Well, anybody can easily become homeless. You can get laid off and get divorced and, get kicked out of your house, and all of a sudden you're not making any money, and all of a sudden you're in the same predicament. And so it can happen to anybody at any time for whatever the reasons may be. So I think it's important that we continue to talk about it. We continue to try to find ways to solve the problem. And, again, we're not always working with these at the agencies or at places where we can dive in and actually solve the problem. We can help work, but I think there's some things that we can maybe legislate at some point that may be able to help what we're doing. I think, inclusionary zoning was a little bit of a start towards some of at least getting more affordable housing. It's not exactly as far as some people wanted to go, but I hope we can continue to do good things and get us to where at least we have a low amount of shelter as opposed to going the other way where it starts to get worse and worse and worse, because that's what I worry about as this city zooms forward, that we could be in that predicament. So thank you. I just wanted to throw that out there in general discussion.
Mm-hmm. If I may quickly comment on my part, I would just say one of the, until most recently, unaddressed homeless needs was that of youth homelessness. Stepping Stones showed up. They're conquering everything they see. And only 3 or 4 years, they've had the development of like a 10 to 15-year-old organization. But until then, one of the biggest unknown variables, who's out there, what's going on, what category do they fall under, was youth. So I wouldn't begin to speculate as to how to justify that a 16-year-old deserves to be kicked out. But there are families and parents in this city that have made that determination. And there are organizations that are working to intervene with it. So, I mean, it's never going to be cut and dry about who deserves what happens to them in a community as complex as ours. There's a lot of different terminology. A lot of it comes from grants, and HUD is to blame for a lot of it. They literally coined the term couch surfing. Like, that's a fun time to be had, I guess. So trying to get the terminology right, I think, is somewhat forgivable by most people who are in the situation who might self-identify as homeless, just to kind of get the point across. I would say I've yet to find anyone who wants to identify as a squatter, but for the most part, the terms mean different things, and they designate different problems, which illuminates the fact that the scope of the problem is so big that we don't know who's staying with family, who's shuffling between friends, who's living sheltered, but with a very unsafe and inappropriate situation. It's a very complex situation, and The city is tackling a lot of different efforts to try to do it, and I'm seeing a lot of very positive signs that we're going to be working together and trying to collaborate both interdepartmentally and, you know, with other organizations. But you still see people who are very much kings of their own hill, who will go to a meeting about, you know, working with, you know, unsheltered populations and campsites, and make a statement that, well, if you feed them water, then of course more people are going to come, as though like we're supposed to let people die. Like that's pretty ridiculous. And you'll see a lot of finger pointing, and I just want to kind of state for her benefit that Alderman Klee is the only successful person in the entire city staff or elected officials, who's managed to get the railroad's attention for anything. She was attempting to reach out to them to fix the railroad crossings on Main Street. So Nashua, when they actually fixed the roads we're all losing tires and stuff on, and I have a Segway, so I've almost wiped out a couple dozen times. When that actually gets fixed, it's because she finally got the attention that it deserved. But, of course, some people took the opportunity to sideswipe and try to say that she was asking for more than she was or something different than she was, and to visit those intentions. That's unnecessary. If we're working collaboratively and we're willing to recognize the scope of the problem, then we need to be focused on solutions. And I will say that the general tone of the meetings that we had with the railroad companies last week, I was very proud of the departments who stated unequivocally, Nashua is not going to pass this on to another community. Nashua is going to address the situation as it is, and Nashua is going to use every tool and every resource that it can to do that. I think we need to be saying that confidently and much more assertively than we have been. Much the same way as we were very pleased when the Safe Station program was up and running and firing on all cylinders. That took the fire department stepping forward. That took Harbor Homes stepping forward. And that took people willing to say, okay, well, this looks like an unmanageable mess, but the only way to address it is to start with the first thing we can do and then move on to the next thing and the next thing. So I am glad there's the enthusiasm and the appreciation on this body. I say share it, engage your fellow aldermen, and, you know, participate in as much of the meetings and planning as we can, because this is a big lift, but it's not something we can't do. We have the resources, we have the capability, and that's what Nashua does. Alderman Klee?
Thank you. First, I want to address some of the things that you said, as well as what others have said. Yeah, I contacted our DC legislators to put a fire under CSX, as they just bought Pan Am, but I do want to give our city departments and head the credit for pushing this forward and so on. I'm a nag, I make a lot of noise, and I don't let things go. So yeah, in some instances I've been thrown under the bus for certain things, and if people really read the emails, they know that that would not be true. But so I do appreciate the attention, and but I do want to say that, as you stated, we have great city staff who are stepping up and who are saying we're not going to let this happen, and we're not going to push these people somewhere else. So I applaud our staff. I mean our city departments quite a bit on that. The other thing is, one of the issues that was kind of brought up was that people say they're not worth. I'm going to tell you a personal story. Some people live paycheck to paycheck. I lived in Ogden, Utah, came home on vacation, and when I came home on vacation, my entire apartment burned down. I had nothing left, nothing. And I had to go back there. The only thing that was left there was my car, because a friend of mine had driven me to the airport and took my car. Otherwise, I had nothing. When they showed me what my stuff was, my phone had melted to my chair. If I had been there, I would not have made it, because the person below me was smoking and my apartment went up fast. Other than I did have a waterbed back then, so maybe I would have survived.
That one spot.
Yeah, that one spot would have survived. But I was lucky enough that the people there got a hold of the Red Cross to help give me $150 for clothing allowance. People within that Canyon Cove Apartments got me an apartment, knew that things were going to be hard. They gave me a couple months rent. People I worked with all kind of stepped up. So I was lucky, I was blessed. I didn't stay there long because I had a hard time sleeping, so I came back home and moved in with mommy and daddy, who took me in. So sometimes you're living paycheck to paycheck, and no one deserves not to have a home. And I don't care what the problem is. I don't care if they have a drug, mental health. No one deserves to live out, especially when we just had this rain. I had some sleepless nights over that. But, Mr. Chairman, I know we've talked about this before. If it would be possible for maybe Manager Long to give a presentation to this committee exactly about the home fund and rental and so on. And I think Alderwoman Timmons kind of touched on that we have this, and I don't think people understand what it really is. And I mentioned it at CDBG, so if we could, maybe at some future meeting, not necessarily the next one, but where we can really discuss how people can apply for it, how they qualify for it, a better understanding. I know at one point we kind of lowered the funding in one of those funds because it wasn't really being utilized, and I think it was an education thing. So if we could, just for a future meeting. And then I'd just like to thank you for having Attorney Mira here. I think that was extraordinarily helpful for us to all. And I didn't know about, and I try to help people as much as I can through welfare, through front door agency and so on. And I was completely unaware of that. So thank you for bringing that to our attention and educating us on that. Thank you.
We'll definitely try to get the home funds presentation. I'm not going to put Manager Long on the spot right now, but I will pursue that and then do it in whatever format they think is the best. Alderman Moran?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And have a competition with Alderman Lopez about who can be more jaded about the issue of homelessness. I think one of the issues that has caused and contributed to the opiate, the mental health, and the homeless, unsheltered crisis is the continued sending these vital, critical services that were once regulated and done by city and local and state government to underfunded nonprofits. We do less and less every time, and now we rely on contractors, basically, to be a pseudo arm of the government, basically, and shift liability, fringe benefits, everything that comes along with it out of our purview and out of our sight, other than when Mr. Long comes in to say, let's send these funds to these charities who are very underfunded. And we have less and less control of what they can do with the money that comes from taxpayer coffers. If we were truly serious about addressing these critical issues, we would look at Department of Public Health and we would increase substantially the service that they render to city residents, increasing staff, increasing services, providing treatment, just like we would give a shot to someone. We could also provide counseling through public health, same vein. Secondly, expanding Nashua Housing Authority and offer people free or low income housing who desperately need it, rather than putting up moderate housing all the time, or it's taking land that we already have and giving it to the Housing Authority to develop and help finance and become creative like we do with financing for these larger for-profit properties, public-private partnerships, and actually invest in what we actually will have control over. Because if there's an issue in the public health department, we actually get to respond to that. We can say, Director Bradley, X, Y, and Z needs to be done. We can't say that to a nonprofit that we fund. We can't tell them how to manage, how to respond, etc. And then we should build a homeless shelter, low barrier homeless shelter that's run and operated by the city. We can do these things, they're within our power, but it's a political nightmare to tell our constituents we need money to do this, but we might not be able to, make the riverfront look nice this year. It's a hard pill to swallow, but when I went to Joanne's for breakfast on Sunday, like I typically try to do, terrible storm, everyone's under the church, just sleeping outside, trying to stay dry. Is throwing a couple bucks into your tax rate worth that person having dignity and where they have access to housing and care? And is it worth any of us to challenge the the particular plan that's already in place, expanding moderate and higher income housing, we can say no. There is 15 of us. And if there's a majority of us, we could say no. Do you have the strength to do it, though? And it's not just about lecturing the folks that come here or the general public. It says, as a majority, do we have the strength to do it? You got to self-reflect and see if you're willing to take on those big, big pieces of change that would need to actually address these issues. All right, thank you.
I mean, to that point, we clear cut the riverfront to make it look better and just revealed all of the homeless sites, so those were there the whole time. Any other comments? I think we switched somehow from, I think it's Alderman Tebow's fault, we switched from discussion to comments. Anyone have any comments that they would like to just make as alderman?
We need to do public, at least announce public comment first.
Okay, public comment. Anyone wishing to make public comment? There is none. Where are we at now? Remarks by the alderman, anybody?
I think we just did it.
Okay, I'm sure. I'm never clear on what the difference is. All right, can I get a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
All right. All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye,
All those opposed? And we are adjourned at
8:31.
8:31. Thank you, everyone.